Ever been kicked out of your own bloodline just for not putting a ring on someone's finger? Well, I have. And no, this isn't some kind of metaphor or exaggeration. I mean it literally. My entire family had a wedding, my little sister's wedding, to be exact, and they decided I didn't belong. Not because I had a criminal record or showed up drunk to Thanksgiving last year. Not because I was fighting with anyone or owed people money. Nope. The reason they gave, after I dug it out of them like a splinter under the skin, was that the wedding was for married people only. I'll never forget the moment I found out. It was a Wednesday morning in late September, a work-from-home day, which meant I was half-dressed and half-caffeinated, staring at my laptop when the Facebook notification pinged on my phone. Madison just updated her status, married to Caleb Jennings. My stomach sank, not because she got married, I knew that was coming, but because I hadn't been invited. There it was. Photos. Videos. Balloons. Cake. Tears. A whole damn ceremony. And not one single word to me about it. Not even a text. Now, to understand why that hit me like a brick to the chest, you have to know something about my sister and me. We weren't just siblings in the usual sense. I used to call her Kiddo, and she called me J-Bear well into her 20s. When our dad died, I was the one who drove her to school every day, even when I was juggling 2 jobs and night classes. I helped pay for her first car. I coached her through panic attacks during college finals. I mean, hell, I walked her down the aisle at her first wedding, back when she was 22 and thought love meant answering text messages on time. That marriage lasted 18 months. Still, I was there for all of it. So to not even get a goddamn invite this time around? It wasn't just a slap in the face. It was a backhand, followed by a kick in the ribs. And the worst part? No one thought it was weird. Not Mom. Not our older brother, David. Not even my cousin Cheryl, who I literally helped through her divorce last year. They all knew. And they all went. I didn't blow up their phones. I didn't crash the wedding. I didn't even post anything passive-aggressive on social media, although God knows I wanted to. Instead, I sat on my couch that night in silence, the glow of my TV screen flickering across an untouched bowl of microwave popcorn. I stared at the photos that kept pouring into my feed, photos of my family laughing, dancing, clinking glasses, hugging my sister. And the captions. Oh man, the captions. So happy to celebrate love today with family. Nothing like a wedding to remind us what matters most. I wanted to throw my phone through the goddamn wall. But I didn't. I just sat there and let it all settle in. You know that feeling when you realize you've been erased from something that was supposed to include you? Like a ghost watching your own life play out from the sidelines? That's what it felt like. Like I had died, but nobody told me. About an hour into this pity spiral, I finally got a text. One single text. From my cousin Mike, the same one who once tried to borrow $10,000 from me after crashing his motorcycle into a Taco Bell. It said, "Hey man, sorry you couldn't make it. Heard you weren't invited 'cause of the whole no singles thing. Kinda weird, huh? Anyway, you doing okay? No singles." That was the phrase. As if I was a walking failure. As if not being married made me some kind of liability. I was 41, divorced, childless, and running a mental health startup out of a cluttered 2-bedroom apartment that still smelled like old curry and printer ink. But I was not a damn failure. Not by any definition that should have mattered. I didn't respond to Mike. What was I supposed to say? Thanks for the half-assed sympathy? I turned off my phone and turned up the volume on the TV, flipping through channels just to drown out my own thoughts. And that's when it happened. That's when the unexpected cracked through my night like a lightning bolt. Channel 7. Local news. And there it was, my face. Blown up across the screen in one of those dramatic breaking news banners they always use for weather alerts or celebrity arrests. Except this time, it was announcing the winners of the National Innovator Awards, an annual thing I'd forgotten I was even nominated for. Apparently, my app, designed to detect early signs of suicidal ideation using voice patterns and facial expressions, had just won the damn thing. They even showed a pre-recorded clip of me accepting, which I'd filmed 2 weeks earlier in a button-down shirt and sweatpants because I thought no one would actually air it. I blinked at the screen like an idiot, like I'd hallucinated it. But there it was. My name, my photo, my work. And right under it, a scroll bar announcing that the awards show would be replayed in full later that night, live on national television. So while my sister tossed her bouquet into a crowd of matching dresses and fake eyelashes, and while my family raised their champagne glasses to forever, I sat on a second-hand couch in a dim room, watching my own face be broadcast across the country. That night, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt like something bigger than their tiny, rule-obsessed world. And that feeling, it didn't just surprise me. It scared the hell out of me. Because I knew what was coming next. Growing up in my family, marriage wasn't just expected. It was the finish line, the diploma, the gold medal on a neck worn like a damn badge of virtue. You could be a screw-up in every other aspect of life, but if you were married, hell, even unhappily, somehow you had still done something right. I remember watching my cousin Rob get praised for settling down at 22 with a woman he barely knew, while I, already years into building a company from scratch, was asked when I was finally going to stop fooling around and get serious. They said it with that tight little smile, the kind you wear when you're trying not to sound judgmental but still want the insult to land. I used to laugh it off, back when I thought I could outrun that kind of thinking. But the truth is, it gets in your blood. That pressure. That underlying script you're expected to follow. High school sweetheart. Engagement by 25. 2 kids by 30. By the time I hit 35 with nothing to show but an ex-wife and a struggling idea for an app no one believed in yet, I was no longer the proud son or the supportive brother. I was the ghost at the table, present but invisible. Talked over. Avoided. Left off the group texts about summer vacations and family cruises. I wasn't a black sheep. Black sheep are at least acknowledged. I was more like a smudge on a photo everyone tried not to notice. You want to know how fast a family can forget your birthday? Try getting divorced. Try walking into a holiday dinner after finalizing the paperwork and realizing no one saved you a seat. It wasn't even about my ex, who wasn't some monster. They liked her, sure, but the divorce wasn't scandalous. It was quiet, mutual, sad as hell. But in their minds, I'd failed the assignment. And failing that assignment meant you no longer got to sit at the grown-up table. What would you do if your own family told you that you didn't belong just because you weren't married? Would you still try to reconnect, or would you let it all burn? Drop your thoughts below. I'm really curious, because honestly, I still don't know if I did the right thing. See, it's not like they ever came out and said it. There wasn't a meeting. No one emailed me a memo titled, "You're not welcome anymore." It was just slow, quiet subtraction. Fewer calls. Shorter replies. Plans made without me. I started to notice that every time I offered to host something, Thanksgiving, birthdays, even 4th of July, I'd get polite declines and vague excuses. But as soon as someone else offered, suddenly everyone was free. One year, I even offered to fly everyone out to a cabin in Colorado, my treat, no strings. Not a single taker. Oh, the kids have school, David's got work, mom's knee is acting up. The following month, they all showed up at my brother's beach house in Florida for 3 days of sun and sangria. I found out because Cheryl accidentally posted a group shot and tagged me. When I asked about it, David laughed and said, "Oh man, I thought we mentioned that. Must have slipped my mind." That phrase stuck with me, must have slipped my mind. Like I was luggage someone forgot at the airport. The problem with being quietly erased is that you start to question your own worth. You start thinking maybe it is your fault. Maybe if you tried harder, stayed married longer, smiled more, been less intense, less ambitious, more like everyone else. I went through that spiral for a while. Therapy helped, but the damage clings to your ribs like tar. I remember one specific Sunday dinner about a year after the divorce. I had shown up with a bottle of red wine and a pie I baked myself, trying to prove something, I guess. Trying to matter. My brother and his wife were arguing across the table about a countertop renovation, and my mom was going on about someone's cousin getting engaged again. Madison, my sister, who was still single at the time, sat next to me and just kept looking at her phone. At some point, someone, maybe Cheryl, asked me if I'd started dating again, in that tone people use when they're asking if you've considered joining a monastery. I said no, not really, and the conversation died in the middle of the table like a squirrel hit by a truck. No follow-up. No curiosity. Just silence. Then someone changed the subject to cruise itineraries. I took 2 sips of wine and left before dessert. That was when I really felt it, the shift. That sense that I was now officially different. Not just because I was single, but because I was no longer married. The ring was off, the illusion broken, and to them, that made me unreliable. Like I had cracked some ancient code of belonging and now had to pay penance by sitting at the kids' table for the rest of my life. So when I saw those wedding pictures the night Madison got married, pictures of my entire family laughing like a Hallmark commercial, I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. Not the loud kind of anger, but the kind that coils behind your ribs and waits. The kind that hardens into something sharp. I wanted to throw something, say something, send a message that would cut through the bullshit and the fake smiles and the passive-aggressive traditions they'd weaponized against me. But I didn't. Instead, I turned the TV volume back up, still dazed from seeing my own face broadcast on the news, and reached for the remote again. That's when my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. For a split second, I considered ignoring it, but something told me to pick it up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate being an asshole again. Either way, I answered, and that's when everything started to shift. The call came from a producer at the event, someone named Danielle with a voice like a news anchor and the kind of hurried politeness that made me sit up straighter without even thinking about it. She told me they'd moved up the segment because another recipient had dropped out at the last minute, and since my clip was already recorded and edited, they were pushing it forward. Tonight, in fact, at prime time. I could barely form a sentence. I'd submitted the video weeks ago at the urging of my communications guy, thinking there was no chance I'd even make it to the shortlist, let alone the final 3. I had almost forgotten it entirely. Now, apparently, I was going to be seen by millions of people live, on national television, just a few hours after watching my own family parade around in coordinated outfits without me. It was the kind of news that should have made me ecstatic, but instead, I just sat there, letting her words echo in the static silence of my living room. I said thank you, nodded into the phone like an idiot, and hung up. I stared at the wall for what felt like an hour. It was a weird kind of numbness. Not sadness, not joy, something else. Like my body was catching up to the idea that my name was about to matter in a way it never had before. And nobody I loved was going to hear it from me. You have to understand, this app wasn't some overnight success, slapped together in a weekend and thrown on the App Store with a prayer. It came out of real pain, mine and other people's. After my divorce, I started noticing how people hide their pain in the smallest ways, in their voice, their posture, the way they say, I'm fine, like it's a shield and not a truth. So, I started building a tool that could detect those patterns, early signals of emotional distress that most people miss. It started as a side project. Then it became a mission. Then it became a product. And then, quietly, without my family ever knowing, it became something big. We'd hit 100,000 downloads 3 months ago. We'd partnered with 2 clinics in Chicago. A university in Oregon had picked it up for student mental health support. But I didn't post about it on Facebook. I didn't bring it up at family dinners. It felt too real, too personal, too unlike anything they would understand or even respect. I could already hear the questions in my head, but how do you make money with that? Or, why would someone need an app for emotions? They always wanted something they could touch, something they could brag about at church or during bridge night. And this? This wasn't that. This was quiet, messy work. Invisible success. Which, in my family, didn't count for much. So when the broadcast came on, I didn't even plan to watch it. I poured myself a drink, turned off the lights, and sat on the couch with the remote in one hand, just in case I changed my mind. And when my name finally appeared, white letters against a deep blue background, professional, official, irreversible, I felt something in my chest tighten. I watched myself on screen in that pre-recorded clip, smiling like I actually believed the words coming out of my mouth. I talked about suicide rates, about how many people never get a chance to ask for help, about how this tool was meant to catch them before they fell all the way down. I spoke clearly. I looked confident. I almost didn't recognize myself. Then the applause started, and even though it was just a recording of an audience in New York I'd never met, I felt the energy of it hit me like a wave. And for a second, just 1 second, I thought, maybe this is the moment that makes them proud. Maybe this is what it takes to finally count again in their eyes. But that thought died the moment I remembered the no singles rule. The wedding photos. The fact that no one even thought to call. Except now they were. It started with a text. My brother. Holy shit, dude. Are you on TV right now? Then another. My aunt. Jason, are we seeing you on CNN? Is that your app? Then the flood came. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Old friends from high school who still lived in town. A voicemail from my mom, her voice cracking as she said, I had no idea, Jason. We're all watching. And the crown jewel? A text from my sister, still in her wedding dress, apparently. Wow, you could have told us. Proud of you. Proud of me. Just like that. No apology. No explanation. Just pride, conveniently timed and packaged for delivery. It should have felt good. It should have felt like the redemption arc every underdog waits for. But all I could think about was how none of them gave a damn until the world told them they should. They needed proof. A headline. A trophy. Something they could pass around at brunch and say, that's my brother, as if they hadn't been actively erasing me for years. I wasn't real to them until I was a bullet point on a screen. I didn't respond to any of it. Not yet. I just sat there with my drink, watching the broadcast end, watching my name fade from the bottom ticker, and I realized something important. This moment wasn't mine to share with them anymore. They didn't earn it. They weren't there when I was coding at 2 in the morning on a broken laptop, or when I spent 3 nights in a row reading user testimonials that made me cry so hard I couldn't breathe. They weren't there when I almost gave up, when I screamed into my own hands from the pressure, when I hit my lowest, loneliest point and still kept going. They only showed up once the lights were on. And now they wanted in. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to open the door. The morning after the broadcast felt like waking up inside someone else's life, like I'd accidentally been cast in a movie I never auditioned for, only to discover halfway through the script that everyone had suddenly remembered I existed. My phone, which had spent the better part of the last few years gathering dust during holidays and birthdays, had turned into a small, buzzing grenade by 7 in the morning. There were texts stacked on top of missed calls stacked on top of social media messages from people who couldn't be bothered to return a damn email 2 weeks ago when I offered to host Thanksgiving. It was surreal and hilarious and nauseating all at once. People who had once looked through me at family gatherings were now just so proud and always knew you were onto something big. My cousin Vince, who once drunkenly told me at a barbecue that I should really get a real job, had apparently sent me a voice note filled with excited rambling and an invitation to be a guest on his podcast, which I didn't even know he had. My mom texted at least 3 separate times before 8 o'clock, the last of which read, Jason, honey, let's do brunch soon. Everyone's talking about your award. Let's do brunch. As if years of silence and side glances and empty chairs were suddenly wiped clean by a 5-minute TV segment and a pre-recorded acceptance speech. I sat in my kitchen, watching the steam rise off a cup of coffee that tasted more bitter than usual, and I tried to piece together how I actually felt about all of it. I wanted to be angry. I was angry. But it wasn't the kind of fire-spitting rage I expected. It was quieter, heavier, like grief wearing a mask of sarcasm. I laughed out loud at some of the messages, then immediately felt the bitterness chew through the sound. You know what's funny? Success is supposed to feel like something. Like a mountain peak or a finish line. But sometimes it just feels like a party you weren't invited to until after the cake was cut. They only showed up now because someone else, someone on TV, someone in a suit had given me this stamp of approval. And now that the world thought I was important, they were scrambling to remember why they ever liked me in the first place. It was like being rediscovered by archaeologists after they'd already built a strip mall over your grave. I read through every message slowly, like they were evidence in a trial, each one proof that they hadn't disappeared because they were busy or distracted or overwhelmed. They'd made a choice. And now, they were making another one. To come back. To pretend the exile had never happened. To erase the years of being overlooked by slapping the word brunch on it like some cheap label that was supposed to fix everything. My sister hadn't texted again. That somehow irritated me more than anything else. One message, short and vague, proud of you, and nothing since. No explanation, no apology, no attempt to make sense of the wedding decision. She'd vanished again, into that familiar silence where she didn't have to answer for anything. Meanwhile, my brother David had sent a wall of texts that opened with, "Man, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye," and ended with, "Let's catch up. This weekend work for you?" I didn't answer anyone at first. I just let it pile up. I needed time to sit in it, to stew, to analyze, to poke at the emotions and see which ones bled. There was a part of me that wanted to take the high road, to say yes to brunch, to smile through the hypocrisy and pretend that this was just a misunderstanding. But a louder, stronger part of me, one that had been growing slowly for years, was done pretending. Still, I wasn't stupid. I knew that revenge, even the poetic kind, rarely comes with peace. So I didn't respond out of spite. I responded out of calculation. Around noon, I texted my mom back. "Sure, let's do brunch. My place. Saturday, 11. I sent it without emojis, without extra punctuation, just flat and firm like a judge's ruling. A few minutes later, she replied with a dozen exclamation marks and a promise to bring her famous quiche, like it was still 1997 and we were all pretending not to hate each other. Brunch at my place. My terms. My turf. I didn't want to go to their house, sit at their table, and play along like nothing had happened. I wanted them to come to me, to see the world I'd built without them, the one that didn't include them anymore unless I chose to open the door. The rest of the day I spent cleaning not just for them, but for myself. I wanted the place to reflect the person they refused to acknowledge until now. I wanted them to see the framed photos of user testimonials I kept on my wall, the awards and notes from college students who'd written to say the app had saved their lives. I wanted them to choke on the realization that I had built something valuable without their applause, without their support, and without their permission. I wasn't naive enough to believe one brunch would fix anything, but I wasn't going to run from the chance to look them in the eye, either. I was done hiding. I was done trying to earn their approval like a dog waiting for scraps under the table. So I set the table with real dishes, not the mismatched ones I usually used. I lit a damn candle. I arranged the furniture. I made the space look like a place someone successful would live, not for them, but because I needed to finally see it myself. And as the sun started to set, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my sister. One word. Coming. No apology. No explanation. Just a quiet admission that she was walking back into a space she had helped empty. I stared at that message for a long time before I typed my reply. See you then. There's a strange kind of silence that comes before family shows up, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful or calm, but loaded and tight, like a room waiting for a storm to walk through the front door. That was the air in my apartment that Saturday morning. ID spent the last hour straightening already straight books, wiping down surfaces that didn't need wiping, and rearranging chairs not because they needed to move, but because I needed to move. It wasn't nerves, exactly. It was something worse, expectation without hope. Like I already knew this wasn't going to be a heartwarming reunion, but some part of me still wanted to be wrong. They arrived late, of course, trailing in one by one like actors stumbling onto the wrong set. My mom came first, clutching a quiche and offering the kind of smile that looked practiced in a mirror. Then my brother, David, wearing a polo shirt 2 sizes too small and already sweating through the collar. Then Cheryl and Vince, who somehow brought a fruit salad I didn't ask for and a bottle of champagne, which I didn't need. Last was Madison, the bride, the one who decided I was too unwed, too unworthy to stand beside her on what was supposedly the biggest day of her life. They all came in smiling. Too much. Too wide. Like people trying to talk over a secret they swore never to mention. I watched them exchange glances, squeeze each other's shoulders, compliment my place like it wasn't 100 times nicer than the cluttered ranch house they all still clung to like a sacred relic. They marveled at the light fixtures, the rugs, the smell of the candles. "You've really done well for yourself," someone said, and it was meant as a compliment, but it landed like an accusation. No one mentioned the wedding. Not once. Not even in passing. They talked about the weather, the news, the traffic getting into the city. They asked if I was dating, but only as a formality, like checking off a box. And when I said no, I wasn't seeing anyone, the room got just a little quieter for just a moment too long, before someone filled the gap with a joke about online dating and another sip of champagne. I just let them talk. I served food, poured drinks, kept my tone light and neutral, and watched. Because I wasn't here to yell or cry or confront. I was here to observe, to see them squirm under their own bullshit, to see how long they could pretend everything was fine. And let me tell you, nothing makes people more uncomfortable than when you refuse to play your part in their performance. Madison was the worst of all. She hugged me like nothing had happened, like we'd just seen each other last week and not after she'd hosted a wedding I wasn't welcome at. She complimented my haircut, complimented the app, said, "I saw your face on TV," and screamed, like it was a punchline instead of a betrayal. She didn't ask how I was, not really. She didn't explain. She just smiled that tight, teeth-showing smile and took a second helping of quiche like she wasn't a goddamn ghost sitting across from me in skin. There were moments, quiet ones, where I caught their faces slipping. Cheryl, looking down into her mimosa a beat too long. Vince, glancing at my bookshelf and quickly looking away. Even David, who laughed too loud when I mentioned a feature we were testing that monitored voice strain under stress. But no one cracked. No one said what we all knew was floating just under the surface, that I had been cut out. Deliberately. Systematically. And now they were all trying to buy their way back in with cheap compliments and store-bought fruit. After the plates had been cleared and the champagne bottle was nearly empty, my mom asked if she could speak to me in private. Her voice was soft, like it always is when she's about to say something she knows will land wrong. I nodded and led her to my bedroom, which suddenly felt too personal, too exposed, like I'd brought a spy into a sacred place. She sat down on the edge of my bed and folded her hands like she was about to pray. Then she looked up at me and said, "Jason, I need to tell you something you're not going to like." Which, in our family, usually meant someone had cancer or someone got arrested. But this time it meant something else entirely. She told me the no singles rule wasn't really about tradition. It wasn't even an official rule, not really. It was more of a decision, made quietly, behind closed doors because, according to her, there were concerns about drama if I showed up. She said it like she was reading a prepared statement, something rehearsed and sanitized. "Some people were worried you'd be uncomfortable," she added, eyes flinching just slightly. I asked her who some people were, and she hesitated. "Well, Madison mostly. And, well, your ex was going to be there." I swear I felt the floor tilt under my feet. My ex-wife. The one I hadn't spoken to in almost 3 years. The one who'd walked out after deciding she wanted something else, something simpler, softer, less complicated than the life we were building. She was at the wedding. Invited. Welcomed. Included. While I was watching the damn thing unfold through filtered Instagram stories and shaky video clips like some stranger on the outside of a locked room. My mom didn't say much else after that. She didn't need to. She looked at me like I was supposed to understand. Like it made sense that they had decided to protect my ex from me and not the other way around. Like I was the threat, the embarrassment, the one who might say the wrong thing, wear the wrong expression, ruin the perfectly curated facade of family unity they were trying to photograph. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat down next to her and stared at the wall. And in that moment, something in me closed for good. Not with rage, not with hate. Just a clean, hard click like a door locking shut from the inside. Because now I knew the truth, and there was no going back. There's a very specific kind of betrayal that doesn't arrive with a knife to the back or a dramatic confrontation, but instead lands with the slow, heavy ache of being quietly pushed out by people who claim they're just trying to keep the peace. That's what I felt sitting there on the edge of my own damn bed, listening to my mother explain, without blinking, without flinching, that the real reason I wasn't invited to the wedding wasn't because of some bullshit, married people only tradition, but because they thought it would be less awkward for her if I wasn't there. Her, meaning my ex-wife. The woman who left me. The woman who hadn't spoken a single word to me in almost 3 years. The woman who, according to my mother, showed up to my sister's wedding looking lovely and very put together, standing next to her new husband like she'd never been part of our family's long list of dysfunctions and betrayals. They had made space for her, smiled for photos with her, toasted champagne with her, and deliberately removed me from the picture to keep the whole damn thing neat and pretty. I asked my mother, point blank, who made that decision, who decided that my presence would be the contaminant at the party. She hesitated like someone stepping onto ice too thin to trust. It was disgust, she said, which told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't one person. It was a conversation. A group decision. A quiet consensus built behind my back while they were all pretending to be praying for my healing, or whatever other hololine they liked to post under inspirational Facebook quotes. So let me get this straight, I said, because I needed to hear it out loud to believe it. They invited my ex-wife to the wedding, gave her a seat, gave her a +1, smiled in pictures with her, and just cut me out. Not because I'd caused problems. Not because I'd done anything wrong. But because I made them uncomfortable. Because seeing me might have made the room feel too real. Because I was the walking reminder that not every relationship ends with a goddamn honeymoon and matching bath towels. My mother said it wasn't like that. That no one meant to hurt me. That they just wanted the day to be simple, smooth, happy. I laughed in a way that wasn't really laughing. It was the sound a person makes when the final illusion finally shatters, and all that's left is cold air and empty space where love used to be. I stood up slowly, not because I was in a rush to leave, but because I wanted her to feel every second of the silence building between us. She looked smaller than she ever had before, sitting there with her hands folded in her lap like a little girl waiting for a punishment. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just said the one thing that had been burning through my throat since the moment she told me the truth. You didn't choose peace, I said. You chose comfort. You chose to protect the story you wanted to tell instead of protecting your son. And now you want brunch and smiles and forgiveness, like we're all playing dress-up in a life that never existed. She didn't say anything. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she knew that no combination of words would make that sentence go away. When I walked back into the living room, the rest of the family looked up at me like kids caught stealing candy. Madison had a fork halfway to her mouth, paused in midair, eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't sit down. I didn't wait. I looked at all of them, one by one, and said, I know everything now. That was it. No speech. No theatrics. Just that one line. And it was enough. It landed like a bomb in the center of the room, the kind that doesn't explode right away but shakes the foundation until everything starts to crack. David tried to speak first, he always does, but I held up a hand and shut him down before he could choke out whatever half apology he'd been rehearsing in his head. I didn't want their excuses. I didn't want their guilt. I wanted them to sit in the silence for once, the same way I'd sat in mine all those years, wondering what I'd done wrong. I walked to the door without rushing, opened it wide, and stood there long enough to let them understand that I wasn't just ending brunch, I was ending the lie. They filed out slowly, awkwardly, muttering goodbyes like tourists leaving a disappointing museum exhibit. My mother was the last to move, and I didn't look her in the eye when she passed. I didn't have it in me to offer her even that much grace. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and I leaned against it, not because I was tired, but because my legs felt like they didn't belong to me anymore. The air in the apartment was quiet again, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of clarity, of knowing exactly where you stand, and exactly who no longer stands beside you. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just stood there for a long time, breathing in the emptiness they left behind. And for the first time since the wedding, since the Facebook posts, since the texts started pouring in, I felt something that almost resembled peace. Not because anything had been fixed, but because I finally stopped pretending that it could be. It's funny how quickly silence can turn into fuel once you stop letting it bury you. After that brunch, I didn't just disappear from the family circle again. I made the choice to. This time it wasn't about being left out or excluded or strategically forgotten. This time, it was mine. I unsubscribed from every group chat, muted every thread, and politely declined every follow-up message with a copy-paste line that read, "Hope you're well, but I need some space right now." I think they all expected me to come around again, maybe lick my wounds and come crawling back once the sting wore off. But they didn't realize that something had changed this time, something permanent. Because I wasn't just gone from them, I had finally turned toward something else. Something bigger. Something that didn't ask me to be less than I was. The week after brunch, a small tech blog reached out asking if I'd be willing to speak about the award, the development of the app, and why I built it in the first place. I said yes, half out of spite and half out of a strange, quiet hope that maybe talking about it out loud would help me finally understand what all of this had meant. What I didn't expect was that the piece would go viral in less than a day. Within 48 hours, I had 5 podcast requests, 2 local news stations emailing my assistant, and a rep from a TEDx conference in Colorado asking if I'd consider doing a talk on the intersection of mental health and personal experience. At first, I hesitated. The attention made me uneasy, not because I didn't want it, but because I had never known what to do with being seen. For so long, I'd existed in the negative space between other people's lives, playing support staff to their narratives while mine was quietly deleted scene by scene. But something inside me clicked. Maybe it was that cold silence I'd carried out of that brunch like a scar. Maybe it was the years of being invisible at the very table I helped set. Either way, I said yes. And when I stepped onto that stage in Boulder 6 weeks later, under a single spotlight, in front of an audience full of strangers, most of whom had no idea who I was 10 minutes before, I opened my mouth and told the truth. Not the cleaned-up version. Not the polite, let's all heal nonsense I'd been spoon-fed my whole life. I told the real story. I talked about how families can weaponize silence, how they use words like tradition and peace to hide their fear of discomfort, how the people who should protect us the most often become the architects of our deepest wounds. I didn't use names, but I didn't have to. Anyone with half a soul could feel the weight behind my voice. I spoke like someone who'd been gaslit out of his own memories and finally found the courage to call the fire by its name. When I walked off stage, people stood. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to remind me that truth has an audience, even when family refuses to clap for you. The video hit YouTube within a few days, and for reasons I still don't fully understand, it took off like wildfire. Comments poured in by the hundreds, some from people who'd lived through similar alienations, some from therapists applauding the raw honesty, and some from quiet strangers just saying thank you for putting words to a pain they hadn't been able to name. Then came the calls from publishers. Invitations from universities. Someone from a streaming platform even floated the idea of a documentary. My app saw another spike in downloads. A partnership with a national counseling network solidified. Things started to move, not just forward, but fast. And the faster it all moved, the quieter my phone got, at least from the family. I think, for once, they didn't know what to say. Maybe they were waiting to see if I'd spin the narrative back around and soften it for public digestion. Maybe they thought I'd apologize. Or maybe they were just stunned to see what happens when someone who's been erased finally picks up a pen. But not all of them stayed quiet. One day, about 2 months after the video hit 1 million views, a handwritten envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name. The handwriting was familiar, loopy, too careful, like someone trying hard to make something look relaxed. I knew it before I even opened it. Madison. I waited 3 days before touching it. Left it on the counter like it might catch fire if opened too soon. Part of me didn't want to know. I'd built a strange peace in her absence. But eventually, curiosity got the better of whatever pride was holding me back. The letter was 4 pages long. Front and back. And it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't an apology, at least not in the way that matters. It was a mess of contradictions, half excuses, half regrets, and several paragraphs trying to explain how complicated things had been with the guest list and how Mom and David were trying to make sure nothing dramatic happened and how she should have fought harder for me, but just didn't know how. She said she watched the talk. Twice. Said it made her cry. Said it made her angry. Said it made her proud and ashamed all at once. She said she missed me. That she wanted her big brother back. That it was hard seeing herself through the lens I'd held up to the world. But she never actually said she was sorry. Not for the choice. Not for the pain. Not for handing my seat at her wedding to someone who chose to leave me. She wanted me to call her. Said we could talk. Said we could try again. I folded the letter up neatly and put it back in the envelope. I didn't throw it away. But I didn't call, either. Not yet. Because I'd rewritten my bloodline now, not in DNA, but in truth. In voice. In finally stepping into the light without waiting for anyone else to hold the spotlight. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to being someone else's supporting character. The second letter came 2 weeks later, delivered in the same kind of envelope as the first, the same looping handwriting across the front, but the tone inside was different, sharper. Less like someone extending a hand and more like someone building a wall while pretending it's a bridge. This time, Madison didn't bother with soft language or subtle nudges toward reconciliation. This time, she accused. She said I'd taken a family misunderstanding and weaponized it for clout, for sympathy, for career momentum. She said the speech had made people ask questions she wasn't ready to answer, that her husband's parents had seen it and asked if she was the one I was talking about. She said she'd spent the past few weeks feeling like her wedding had been hijacked by someone else's narrative. She didn't say I lied, not outright, but she said I distorted things, that I left out context, that I turned one painful moment into a public drama, and that now she had to live with how people saw her, even if it wasn't the whole truth. She finished the letter with a sentence that felt like a knife wrapped in silk. I never wanted to hurt you, Jason, but I also didn't deserve to be the villain in your story. I read that line 3 times, letting each word soak in like poison, and then I folded the letter back up and put it with the first. I didn't reply. I didn't text. I didn't call. I just sat with it. Because the thing is, maybe she was right. Maybe I had taken that pain and turned it into something else, something that served me. Maybe the moment I stood on that stage and spoke the truth, I also started crafting a version of it, sanding the edges down to make it fit into sentences that audiences could digest, into stories that strangers could applaud. But what she didn't understand, what none of them seemed to understand, was that I wasn't telling a story about them. I was telling a story about what it means to be erased. What it means to be the one person no one saves a seat for. And if people saw themselves in the villain's role, maybe it wasn't because I put them there. Maybe it was because that's where they stood all along. A few weeks later, I was booked to close a conference in San Francisco, an event filled with mental health professionals, startup founders, and policy advocates. It was one of those big-budget affairs where the stage lights are so intense you can't see the audience until you're halfway through your speech. I wasn't planning to read Madison's letter, not at first. But that morning, I pulled it out of my bag, unfolded the pages, and sat with it while I drank my coffee. And somewhere in the middle of her accusations and justifications, I found the line I needed to build the entire talk around. I didn't deserve to be the villain in your story. When I walked onto the stage, I didn't start with statistics or stories from users or product updates. I started by saying, this is a letter from someone I love who believes I've turned pain into performance. Then I read it. Slowly, clearly. I didn't change a word. I let her voice come through. I let the audience hear the confusion, the guilt, the edge of resentment that lingered beneath every line. Then I folded the letter and slipped it into my back pocket and looked straight into the lights and said, here's the truth. Sometimes the people who hurt you don't think they hurt you. Sometimes they write letters instead of apologies. Sometimes they want you to carry your silence like a gift you never asked for. I talked about what it means to tell the truth in public when the truth is inconvenient to the people who were part of it. I talked about how hard it is to heal when healing means upsetting people who don't want to be reminded of what they did or didn't do. And then I asked the only question that stuck with me since all of this began. If love is conditional, was it ever really love to begin with? The room went quiet in a way that wasn't polite, but reverent. Not applause yet. Just stillness. Like a collective pause from people who suddenly saw themselves not just in the speaker, but in the story. When the applause finally came, it was loud, but it didn't hit me the way you'd think. It didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like a release. Like the final exhale after holding your breath for years. Afterward, I didn't stick around for the networking dinner. I slipped out through the back, got in my car, and started driving south along the coast. No destination, no GPS, just the rhythm of the tires humming against the road and the ocean occasionally flashing into view. My phone buzzed every so often. Texts from people who were in the room, texts from people watching the live stream, texts from people I hadn't heard from in years, including more from my family, probably shaken by what they'd just seen go viral again. I didn't open them. I just kept driving, letting the coastline blur beside me while the sun dipped low into the water, staining the sky with all the colors people write songs about but never really capture. And somewhere between mile marker 72 and the small gas station that sells bad coffee and decent sandwiches, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I was something else, untethered, maybe, or just unfinished. Because there's no clean ending to stories like this. No moment where the credits roll and the family hugs and everything is forgiven with a smile and a pie. Sometimes people stay gone. Sometimes love was never what you thought it was. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is keep going, even when you're not sure what's waiting at the end of the road. Was I wrong to cut them off after they tried to come back? Or was I just finally protecting my peace? Let me know what you do, because honestly, I'm still figuring it out.